A Christmas tree with no lights. A piano no one plays. A name no one dares to say. In this family, silence isn't peace. It's a curtain. And behind it lives the truth they tried to bury. But truth doesn't die. It writes. I didn't turn on the tree lights. It stood there, thin and gray-green, tucked into the corner like a memory I no longer watered. Tiny bulbs still wrapped around its limbs, but the cord stayed unplugged. The apartment was silent, except for the soft, distant rhythm of waves brushing the fogged-up glass, steady as the heartbeat of someone I used to know. Christmas Eve usually carries its own soundtrack. Distant bells, laughter from someone's backyard, that same song you've heard so many times. It becomes wallpaper. But this year, all I heard was the old kitchen clock. Each tick stretched out like the space between two unfinished notes. I sat by the window in a wooden chair, blanket over my shoulders, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The screen on my phone lit up, a message on the lock screen. Sienna. We're keeping it light this Christmas. You understand, right? No question mark. No invitation. No sorry. Just a request wrapped in soft language, like I was something that might upset the balance, a presence to be edited out. I stared at her words for a long time. My eyes didn't blink, but something in me went still, like a song dropping into an unexpected rest, unsure when the next note would come. I knew I wouldn't answer. I didn't need to. I'd replied to messages like that before, tried to understand, tried to explain, tried to lighten up. But this time, there was a silence inside me that didn't want to be filled anymore. Outside, the Christmas lights across the street blinked through thick coastal fog, red and green bleeding together, like a healing wound. A man stood on his balcony stringing more lights. His daughter sat on his shoulders, pointing toward the sky, and laughing like the world was still intact. I turned away, not because I was jealous, but because I no longer knew where to rest my gaze. At the edge of my desk, the old wooden box still sat there, the one where I'd kept all the speech drafts I once wrote for Sienna. I hadn't opened it in years. But tonight, with everything quiet, I thought about lifting the lid, not to relive anything, but to see if anything inside hadn't already been rewritten. I got up from the window, gently placed the cold teacup beside the unlit tree. In my head, a line echoed, one I had once written for my sister, one the crowd had given a standing ovation for. Sometimes, the brightest light comes from the one who never steps on stage. And I thought, maybe this year, I don't have to step on stage at all. Maybe this year, I just write a new script. I don't usually rewatch old speeches, especially not the ones I wrote for someone else. But that night, after Sienna's message, I opened my laptop and searched for the video the internet had already memorized, the TED Talk that touched 1 million hearts in 3 days. The screen lit up the dark room, casting a cold white glow across my face, bright and sterile, like stage lighting. Then her voice came through, clear, confident, each pause timed like a metronome. We aren't born with a voice. We learn how to have one, bit by bit, and sometimes people forget. That voice was given, not self-made. I stared at her lips as she spoke, delivering every line I had typed, revised, and time-stamped like dried blood under my nails. Not just a paragraph. Every beat, every word choice. I remembered struggling between given and borrowed. I chose given. Borrowed felt too bitter. Looking back, maybe bitter would have been honest. Sienna kept speaking. Her voice lifted like a tide, right before it crashes into applause. And it did. I remember the shot, the crowd rising to their feet, the lights falling like confetti rain. And me, back then, watching it all from a rental apartment, sitting in a squeaky chair with a bowl of cold ramen, no one knowing my name, no one asking. I glanced at the laptop again. The screen hadn't changed, but now, my eyes landed on the caption beneath the video, written by Sienna Wynn. I let out a quiet laugh, the kind that dries out in your throat. Then I closed the video, not out of pain, out of repetition. I stood and walked to the window. Across the street, lights blinked steadily in warm yellows and whites, like lines in a script repeated so many times they lost all weight. At my desk, the old typewriter sat where it always had. Not for decoration. I still use it when I want to write something just for me. No edits, no branding, no second guessing. I brushed a light layer of dust from the keys. It wasn't cold, just forgotten. And I asked myself, how long can someone borrow another person's voice before the truth finds the mic? I didn't have an answer, but I knew this much. Tonight, I had just switched it on. I never thought I would disappear. Back then, the lecture hall felt like home. Rows of wooden seats, sunlight cutting across the blackboard from high windows, and bright young eyes that didn't yet know philosophy wasn't about answers. It was about asking the right questions. I taught language, symbolism, how an idea could collapse completely just because someone chose the wrong word. I believed in words, and I believed that if you used them precisely enough, the truth would always find its way. But it was words that pulled me off that stage. A student posted an accusation. They claimed I had quoted a philosophical argument about gender without considering the modern social context. I tried to explain that it wasn't about taking sides. It was about widening the lens. But who listens after the headline? A few quotes ripped from context. A viral thread. A headline built for outrage. And I was told to take some time off, permanently. While I packed up my books, Sienna began to rise. Not in classrooms, but on screens. She was beautiful, articulate, her voice smooth and round, like a song you don't mind repeating. What made people lean in, though, was how she said things that sounded wise, like she'd just thought of them. But they were mine. It started with a few captions, then full posts, then her first public speech. "You're better than any copywriter I've ever worked with," she said once, smiling as she tapped send to her manager. She never asked if I wanted credit. I was paid. Not much, but enough. A family investment, she called it. I nodded. I needed the money. And a small part of me still thought maybe this was a way to be heard, even through someone else's mouth. I wrote about empowerment, about reclaiming your voice, about standing tall, all for someone who had never once been silenced. Each line felt like a beautiful cut, like a rose placed in a glass filled with rusted water, stunning on the outside, but no clean place to bloom. I didn't resent Sienna. Not back then. She was the light people wanted. I was the convenient shadow, the safe space backstage, dark, but warm, until even the backstage was closed off to me. My words were printed on posters, worn on shirts, whispered over commercial voiceovers, and I realized I had become the longest shadow of myself, no shape left, just trailing behind someone else's spotlight. I looked down at my typewriter. The letter E was worn more than the rest, because my name, Elara, begins with it. And so did every draft I ever wrote for Sienna. I used to be afraid I wasn't enough. I don't write those lines anymore. Now, I write questions, like this one. If you've been someone else's voice for too long, when do you get to take yours back? I hadn't planned to watch the live stream. Honestly, I was going to unplug completely. But my phone kept lighting up. Quiet pings in the dark. Group chats. Holiday greetings. Photos of cakes. Trees. Then a link dropped into the old college group thread. Sienna Wynn lived from Light the Hearth. Looks like a Hallmark movie. Curiosity doesn't kill you. It strips away the last bit of skin you were trying to protect. I tapped the link. The screen blinked on. Our old house, now dressed in soft gold lights, a glowing fireplace behind the camera, and a framed family photo placed like a shrine to tradition. I saw my mother, my father, a few relatives, and Sienna, radiant, holding a glass of red wine that caught the light like something recently spilled. She began her speech, slowly, with a soft breath at the start of each sentence, a technique I once taught her in an old voice memo. We don't gather just for the season. We come together to remember those who have always stood with us, even when unnamed, even when unseen. I forgot to breathe. That line, it was mine. Not from an old script, not something recycled. It was from a blog post I had written the night before, under the pen name The Other Sister. I wrote it over a cold cup of tea, as a quiet truth to myself. That maybe worth wasn't in being present, but in having once held something up. It wasn't meant to be borrowed, let alone delivered from a stage where I didn't exist. The screen reflected my face, expressionless, but something inside shifted. A single string pulled too tight, on the verge of snapping. Beneath the video, the comments kept rolling. Her speech is amazing. This line sounds familiar. Didn't someone else write that? New content team? This stuff is next level. And then, the last one before the screen refreshed. This has major Other Sister vibes. I stood up. Didn't bother closing the live stream. Didn't need to. I walked over to the small wooden box, the one where I kept old drafts, unsigned. If you're not in the story they're telling, write your own. I never meant for the blog to become a weapon. But now, I wasn't so sure. This Christmas, they thought I didn't show up. But my words were there. In every quote they cheered, every phrase they reposted, every line they forgot to source. And maybe silence had served long enough. I used to think I wasn't built for confrontation. I learned silence early. Not from weakness, but survival. In this family, the loudest voice always won. And I was the one who stayed quiet, corrected grammar from the sidelines, smoothed sentences, added metaphors that made the speaker sound wise and the audience feel enlightened. But that night, after the live stream, I couldn't sleep. The room felt smaller. Every tick of the clock reminded me I had just watched someone stand in the spotlight, reciting the words I wrote, as if they were their own victory. I stayed up past 3, pulled out old drafts, underlined, compared. Some paragraphs were copied word for word, even the punctuation matched. Then a message came in. Maggie, an old student, the only one who still spoke to me after the scandal. She sent a link. Your blog post. Someone lifted it word for word in Sienna's speech. People online are starting to notice. I didn't reply. Not right away. But a minute later, she sent another text. Silence once protected them. Now, it might undo them. I read that sentence again. Then again. It sounded like a code. She didn't say, get revenge. Didn't say, speak for your pride. Just a truth. That sometimes, forgiveness stretched too long becomes the reason they forget they owe you anything at all. I made tea. Rain started tapping the window, each drop like a slow drumbeat before a quiet parade. My leather notebook lay open on the table. The fresh page was blank, except for a single dash in the middle, like a breath held too long. I picked up my pen. My hand didn't shake. The first line I wrote: "This is not an accusation. It is a witness to a truth that has lived too long under someone else's name." I stopped, watched the ink soak slowly into the paper. Not like fire, like water finding roots. I didn't know where I'd post it. Didn't know if I'd sign my name. But for the first time, I wasn't writing to assist. Not to cover. Not to beautify. I was writing to reclaim the part of me that had been sliced away and labeled support. Maybe I was still the shadow, but this time I was the shadow of a flame. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of rage. Rage is a wave. What I felt was deeper, like the water had split, something heavy sinking to the bottom, something that couldn't be undone. I opened The Other Sister, the blog. Simple layout, white background, black text, no images, just words. And for the first time, they weren't trimmed to fit a brand strategy or an Instagram box. I wrote, not in order, not in TED Talk format, just fragments, memories that never got a thank you, like a rusted tin box found under a bed, filled with unfinished cards and quotes I once sent, but no one answered. Each post was a cut. One where I rewrote an entire draft overnight because Sienna changed topics last minute. Another, typed in an airport lounge while she got a massage at the spa. A line I wrote that was once deemed not inspirational enough, later recited verbatim in her TV interview. I didn't name names. Didn't need to. Anyone paying attention would see it, and anyone stumbling in might start putting pieces together. When I hit publish, there were no fireworks, no drum roll, just a soft browser, ping, like sending an email you already know won't be ignored this time. The next morning, sunlight cut through the curtains at a perfect angle. After days of rain, it felt strange. So I just stood there for a moment, doing nothing, letting it land on my face. I made coffee, turned on my computer, didn't check email, just opened the blog. 6,742 views, 327 shares, a pinned comment at the top. Whoever wrote this deserves a stage. I read it 3 times, not out of pride, out of disbelief. I wasn't used to this. Words I wrote not to elevate someone else, but to finally shine light on myself. That afternoon, a verified Twitter account reposted the blog. The caption read, "This other sister blog is too real. Someone better check whose voice we've been clapping for." I didn't gasp, didn't pop champagne. I just sat there, listening to the wind slip through the window frame, like someone tapping softly on the world, whispering, "I see it now." For the first time, I didn't need a mic. My words, they were already moving on their own. The email came in at 2:03 a.m. No subject line, just one sentence in the body. I read the 2013 manuscript of the December window. That voice, you don't forget it. I stared at the line like it was an old photograph, faded and fragile, and suddenly, startlingly, clear again. No one had ever mentioned that draft. Not in nearly a decade. I had sent it to a small indie press in Portland. Got a thank you note. Then silence. Permanent silence. After a few minutes, I replied, "Not sure if I'm flattered or embarrassed that you still remember." The response came quickly. I kept a printed copy. Not for work. Some passages. I just couldn't forget. His name was Elliot, an editor, now freelance. He said the blog, The Other Sister, had jolted him awake in the middle of the night, Sent him digging through old folders. Not to compare, to confirm. You don't write like anyone else. You write like someone who had their voice cut out and is slowly claiming it back, word by word. I didn't know what to say. In a world where words are often applauded for who says them, not who writes them, being remembered for an unpublished sentence feels as rare as snow falling in August. We started exchanging drafts. I sent Elliot a few chapters of the memoir I was working on, titled The Christmas I Didn't Show Up. He sent them back, marked in pen, gentle, but sharp, not to make me sound better, but more honest. Here, you're softening it for their sake. Don't. Let the words stay hard, like the door they once slammed in your face. I printed each version, clipped them with wooden pins, lined them across my desk like puzzle pieces from a frame that had once shattered. Sometimes, I couldn't keep writing after reading his notes. Sometimes, a single opening line made me cry. Not from sadness, but from recognition. Someone was holding a light up to the part of me I had buried in the dark. On the corner of the desk, a candle burned low, the wick trembling, thin as a whisper that says, "Light doesn't have to be bright. It just has to be real." I never met Elliot in person, didn't need to. Between us was language, and language, when true enough, can bridge people who once believed they had vanished from each other's maps. One night, I asked him, "Do you think this is worth doing?" He didn't hesitate. "I don't know if it's worth it for them, but it's worth it for you." I didn't file a complaint, didn't post a statement, didn't hashtag anything. I sent the originals, 3 PDF files, time-stamped, marked with handwritten notes I had once scribbled for myself. Save this line for the 23-second mark. Slow it down. There were internal drafts, email threads, old feedback between me and Sienna's former manager. I'd kept everything, not out of strategy, but because when you live in shadow, you learn to track your own footprints, so at least you know you were once there. I sent them to the content board of the Voice of Her conference, the same one that gave Sienna the Language Icon of the Year award. In the body of the email, I wrote only this: "You may want to revisit your authorship verification process. Some of those words might not belong to the person on stage. No real name. No need." A few days later, the inbox for the other sister began to heat up. An independent culture reporter named Jules reached out. She asked for an interview, said the writing in the blog was too structured, too raw to be casual. She'd cross-referenced Sienna's speeches and found over 32% of the material matched my posts. "Seems like someone's been living off another woman's voice," she wrote. I didn't respond, but something shifted. Not pride, not revenge. It felt like alignment, like finally organizing a drawer that had been a mess for years, one item at a time, finding its rightful place. Sienna stayed silent, but her recent posts started to gather strange comments. "Sounds familiar. Did your sister write this one too?" The other sister energy is strong here. I didn't react. No likes, no retweets. I just reopened the memoir draft, where Elliot was still leaving quiet notes in the margins. There was one line I had crossed out weeks ago. I brought it back. I used to be the speaker box for someone else's words. Now I'm the original sound. Outside, the fog began to lift. Sunlight slipped through the window, laying across the wood floor like a sentence. Unintentional, but perfectly placed. I stared at it. It felt like a quote I'd once hidden, now surfacing line by line. I didn't need to shout. I just had to let the story go where it was always meant to. I knew the show would be live-streamed. I knew Sienna was receiving the Voice of the Year award at the Light Voice Gala. But I didn't turn on the TV. I made tea, sat at my desk, opened an old draft. The warm desk lamp lit the page in gold. Outside the window, snow drifted gently, like chalk dust, falling from the hand of someone who'd stopped writing. Still, even. I wasn't waiting for anything. Didn't expect news. I just kept my hands busy, typing, reading, deleting, until my phone started buzzing. Once, then again, then 13 more times. Did you see the clip? Wait, is that your voice? Oh my God. I didn't understand right away. But then Elliot sent me a link. Just one line in the message. They played it. No cuts. I tapped the link. Footage from the main stage. Soft violet lights fell across Sienna's face. She stood center stage, microphone in hand, smiling that polished, practiced smile. Then the host stepped forward. Before we invite Sienna to speak, we'd like to play a special video, honoring the words that inspired a year. The screen behind her came to life. And then, it was me. No image, just my voice. A recording from one of the earliest drafts I ever sent Sienna. The only one I'd read aloud, so she could learn the rhythm. Now, my voice played over a montage. Clips of her at events, interviews, on stages I had never stepped onto. Not all of us are born with a voice. Some must find it through pain. Some must lose everything before realizing they've stayed silent too long. The room froze, like my voice was moving between every row, threading itself through the silence. Faces lifted. Some turned to look at her. Sienna wasn't smiling anymore. I stared at the video, my fingers gripping the edge of the chair, not from anger, but from the strange shock of hearing myself in a place I had never been invited to, in a moment no one expected me to belong. I hadn't submitted the audio. I didn't know who in the production team had pulled it. Maybe it was Elliot. Maybe someone else who had started connecting dots. It didn't matter. What mattered was I wasn't there. But my voice was, uncut, unedited, unclaimed by anyone else. And in that moment, beneath the stage lights, in a room that had only ever clapped for the one in front, silence clapped for the one behind the curtain. The first letter arrived by express courier. Thick ivory paper, blue-trimmed envelope, the kind reserved for legal threats or wedding invitations. I didn't open it right away. I made tea, wiped the condensation from the window glass, then used a letter opener to slice the edge, not out of fear, but because I'd once drafted this kind of letter myself. Inside, a warning from a law firm, representing an individual associated with certain content recently circulated on the other sister blog. The language was smooth, polished, heavy with suggestion. No mention of my name, no statement that I was wrong. Just a line crafted like a trap. Dissemination of content perceived as original may cause irreparable damage to the reputations of involved parties. I folded the letter, placed it neatly beside the steaming teacup. Outside, snow began to fall again. Soft flakes, slow, not melting on the glass, just resting there. A few hours later, the phone rang. Mom, I didn't answer the first time, or the second. But I knew she'd call again. She always did. On the third try, I picked up. Her voice trembled, caught somewhere between a whisper and a sob. Sweetheart, what are you doing? You're destroying the family's legacy. People are talking. They're dragging our name into this. The media, the press, Sienna, your father, too. I didn't speak, just listened. To her breath coming fast, to the frantic stitching of words like someone trying to patch a leaking roof with a bedsheet. Not once did she ask, "Is it true?" Not once did she say, "You have the right to tell your story." Only, "What will people think?" And then, finally, in a hush, like she was afraid to hear herself say it, "Can you stop? Please. What are you hoping to get from this?" I hung up, not out of anger, but with the quiet emptiness of someone who just sat through a meeting where everyone talked about them, but never invited them to the table. Later that night, another message lit up the screen. "Sienna, if this is about money, just say so." I read it 3 times, not because I didn't understand, but because I couldn't believe that after everything, this was the only thing she thought I wanted. I didn't reply. I turned off my phone. I lit a candle. The small flame flickered across the table, casting a shadow over the open manuscript. A shadow of words. A shadow of the writer. No more voices reading it for me. No more signatures in place of mine. I wasn't destroying anyone's legacy. I was reclaiming a voice that was never included in any legacy, even though it built the very foundation they're now so desperate to protect. I discovered the blog had been taken down on a colorless morning. The screen showed only one line. White text on black. 404. Page not found. I refreshed the page. Same thing. Checked the admin panel. My login no longer worked. The password had been changed. My heart didn't race. It slowed, like a dying metronome. Each beat a quiet countdown toward nothing. I opened my email. No takedown notice. No policy violation. Just a blank, sterile inbox, as if what once lived there had been erased without ceremony. I called Elliot. No answer. Texted. Nothing. The last thing he'd sent me was a margin note on Chapter 6, a final line, written by hand. "When you let others tell your story, don't be surprised if your part gets written out." I called again. Voicemail. That calm, robotic tone. Breathing for someone who wouldn't pick up. No Elliot, no blog, no foothold. That afternoon, the publisher emailed. "We're sorry. After further legal review, we won't be moving forward. We believe in the strength of your story, but it's simply too risky right now." Risky. A polite way to say we're afraid. I shut the laptop. The screen flickered. That low blue glow brushing across my face, before fading as the battery-saving mode kicked in. I didn't cry. I just sat there, like someone who had taken one step onto the stage before the curtain dropped without warning, and whatever applause might have existed was gone with the lights. The room went still. Outside, wind pushed through the window frame, like a breath someone forgot to let go. The wall clock ticked. Steady, each beat sounding like a crack spreading through wood. I thought about the blog, the entries, the readers, the quiet comments that once said, "Finally, someone gets it." And now, as if none of it had ever been, I looked at my hands. Empty. No screen. No username. No proof. Just a woman who had spoken, and now had no one left to hear her. Maybe this is why people stay silent. Not because they have nothing to say, but because even when they do, it can still be twisted, snuffed out, deleted. The desk lamp flickered, then went out for good. I stayed seated in the dark, didn't get up right away, because if this was the end, I wanted to be awake for every second of it. I brushed the dust from the piano keys with my sleeve. A small movement, almost instinct, like asking permission to touch something long abandoned. The old upright sat quietly in the corner. Dark wood aged into memory. I hadn't touched it since moving in, hadn't planned to. But that night, after the blog was shut down, the manuscript rejected, Elliot gone, and the part of me I thought untouchable pulled apart, I turned on a soft yellow lamp, sat on the worn velvet bench, and placed my fingers on the cold keys. I played slowly, a wordless piece I wrote for Sienna, back when she was a curly-haired girl spinning in the living room, red dress flaring like confetti in a storm. I was 15, and I thought if I wrote something gentle, something beautiful, something that sounded like a good big sister, she'd remember it forever. She didn't, but I hadn't forgotten a single note. The melody drifted through the room like mist. No drama, no tears, just a soft passage, each key like a sentence I never got to say. A song without words that somehow held everything I had left unsaid. I glanced at the bookshelf, a framed family photo, Sienna in the center, smiling, Mom leaning toward her, hand on her shoulder, Dad looking straight into the lens, stern, and me, off to the left, head tilted slightly down, eyes turned away from the camera, not pushed aside, just stepping back, like I'd learned long ago that letting others shine was the only way I might be allowed to stay. I looked at that girl in the photo. She wasn't angry, just resigned, as if giving up her voice, her space, her light, was the price she thought she had to pay to belong. I let my hands fall still. The final note dissolved into the air. The room returned to silence. I sat there, hands resting in my lap, listening, not to the music, but to the space after the music, the space I'd always filled by writing for someone else. Outside, the sky was ink dark, no stars, but the rain had stopped, and I thought, maybe I was wrong, to let them use my name without ever asking for it back. I didn't write that line down. I didn't need to, because for the first time I felt it living inside me, without needing to be posted or validated or published. I stood, turned off the light, and left the piano in the dark. But this time, I knew. It wasn't silent. It was just waiting for the next song. Mine. I printed the manuscript. Not because I had to. The publisher accepted digital files. But I needed to feel it. The weight of something that had once only existed in my head. Pages that turned. The scent of fresh paper mixed with old ink. The draft was thicker than I expected. 213 pages. No elaborate chapter titles. No poetic prefaces. Just truth. Told in my voice, not anyone else's. The years cut out of family photographs. The midnight edits no one knew I made. The quiet, "It's okay," I said each time I was erased from a thank you. I signed my name on the title page, Elara Wynne, for the first time. No pen name, no muted tone. No more writing for someone else to stand in my place. I submitted it to a small independent publisher in Vermont, the kind that prints memoirs that aren't marketable, but are real. I expected nothing. I figured, if I'd already told it all, there was nothing left to lose. And strangely, that felt like the beginning. 3 weeks later, they replied. No dramatic flattery, no overuse of exclamation marks. Just one quiet sentence. "We believe this is a story that deserves to be heard, and deserves to carry the right name." I said yes. No hesitation. They released the first chapter online. A trial post. A single spark tossed into a dry forest after a long drought. I didn't share it. Didn't link it. I just sat in my kitchen, tea in hand, watching the morning light slip across the table, like a thin ribbon unfurling. And then, it spread. Not viral, not explosive, but the way truth does when it finally finds a vessel. Quiet, steady, undeniable. Readers began tagging Sienna. They quoted lines I had written, this time with my name beneath them. They asked, "If this is your sister, why have you never mentioned her? Why do these words feel familiar?" I didn't respond. I didn't have to. For the first time, I didn't need to defend anything, because the story itself was standing, in its own name. No aliases, no abbreviations, no permission asked. I looked at the printed copy, wrapped gently on my desk, beside a bouquet of dried flowers I bought the first summer I moved here. They held no scent, but still kept their shape, like words once forgotten that had finally found a form to live in. I touched the cover. The Christmas I Didn't Show Up. A memoir by Elara. And I knew, whether anyone reads it or not, the most important thing had already happened. I had said my own name. There was no invitation, no message, not even a vague, "Maybe this Christmas we can start again." The family still held the annual gathering, this time more discreet. A security guard at the gate, a sign that read "Private Event, no media access." Inside, dim golden lights, carefully curated conversation, enough warmth to fill the table, not enough truth to make anyone squirm. I didn't go. Of course not. I stayed home, beside the little tree, still unlit, not out of sadness, but because I'd already seen enough real light to know it doesn't always come from bulbs. The memoir spread faster than they'd expected. The first chapter was shared by writers and critics alike. One essay called it "A Quiet Bell Rung for Every Voice Left Backstage Too Long." A headline on a culture site read, "The Other Sister Has a Name." I didn't speak, didn't appear in interviews, didn't do a book signing, didn't live stream a thank you. I simply let the story move, and it knew exactly where to go. On Christmas afternoon, a clip made its way into the news cycle, a press conference, fluorescent lights glaring. Sienna stood in the center of a pristine white room, her dress a tailored apology in crimson. The host smiled, tilting their head slightly. "Sienna, there's been recent speculation that your famous speech last year may not have been entirely written by you. Any comment?" I sat in my chair, hands wrapped around a cup of hot tea, and listened. To silence. No denial, no admission, just Sienna's lips parting, as if to speak, then closing again. That moment didn't stretch because of time. It stretched because it held the weight of all the years I'd carried her words and swallowed my own. I don't know what she was thinking. I don't need to. Because what mattered had already happened. For the first time. The truth didn't need to be shouted, didn't need a headline, didn't need to stand in the spotlight, to be seen. Outside the window, snow fell like memory, not hurried, not clinging, but settling, soft and even, on every rooftop. I set my teacup down. The scent of cinnamon and apple rose gently in the air. Tonight, I wasn't at the table, but my story was the one thing they all had to swallow slowly. Morning light stretched across the wooden desk in a soft, slanted beam. Not bright, not demanding. Just warm, like breath at the beginning of a quiet day. The kind of light that doesn't need to prove anything. It simply arrives. I sat there, in my little apartment by the sea. No music playing, no tea in hand, no need to fill the space anymore. On the desk, the final printed copy of the memoir, bound, ivory pages, a plain cover, no illustrations, just the title, and my name. The Christmas I Didn't Show Up, Elara. I ran my fingers along the edge, the paper rough, textured, real, so different from the flat, blinking screen where most of my words had lived, anonymous, invisible. I turned to the last page. There it was. The final line, printed clean. For the first time, I am the main character in my own story. I never edited that sentence. Not once. Even when Elliot asked, "Do you want to soften it a bit? Make it feel less declarative?" I shook my head. Not this time. Next to the memoir sat a black fountain pen. I picked it up, unscrewed the cap, and signed beneath the final line, Elara Wynne. No initials, no pseudonyms, no line breaks. Outside, the waves tapped gently against the shore, a rhythm like time exhaling. I used to think I was background noise, the footnote, the special thanks at the back of the book. But not now. Now, I'm the opening, the middle, the ending. I stood, drew the curtain back, and let the sunlight fill the room. The Christmas tree still stood in the corner, unlit but no longer lonely. It looked like me, unadorned, undisguised, still standing, still enough. I thought of all the years I wrote for others, sentences edited until my voice disappeared. I lived as if other people were the stage, and I was just the velvet curtain behind them, there only to make them shine. But no one remembers the color of the curtain. Now I know. If you've had the courage to stay behind the scenes this long, you have the courage to step out and not bow. I looked at the signature again. The pen still had ink, and I knew this was only a small ending, because the only real beginning is the one where you arrive fully, as yourself. I once sat by a window on Christmas Eve, watching lights flicker across the street, and thought, maybe the world is only beautiful for those who get invited in. But today, I'm sitting by that same window, and the light, it's coming from inside. There was a time I believed that being silent was the only way to stay, that if I just kept giving, kept stepping aside, someone would finally look back and say, she mattered. But I've learned that waiting for someone else to acknowledge your worth is like writing a letter and never mailing it. The truth is, we can spend years shaping our voice to fit inside someone else's spotlight, only to forget how it sounds in the quiet. And yet, when I stopped asking for permission, when I simply spoke with my own name, it didn't echo back as emptiness. It felt like home. Maybe the question isn't, who stole your voice? Maybe it's, when did you stop believing it was yours to begin with? In a world that so often rewards performance over presence, how do we protect the parts of ourselves that aren't loud, but true? What do we lose when we trade truth for approval? And what might we find if we dared to speak even when no one claps? If you stayed through this story, thank you, truly. Not just for listening, but for holding space for voices that once stood in the margins. And if you've ever written a line that someone else claimed, if you've ever watched from the shadows while someone else got the credit, please know, you're not invisible. You are the original sound. If this story echoes something in you, feel free to share it. Maybe it helps someone else step forward, one word at a time.